The last time the Democratic Party had a significant influence in Idaho was back in the early 1990s. In 1992, Cecil Andrus occupied the office on the second floor. 12 of the 35 senators in the state house and 20 of the 70 representatives in the House were Democrats. However, within 4 years, the Dems made up just 20% of both houses of the legislature. And by year 2000, the Democrats were looking at historic lows in the state house, just 3 senators and 9 representatives. So for the last 3 decades, it's been a trifecta of control for the grand old party: governor, Senate, and House. And since, other than a Tea Party wave, it's been smooth sailing for the GOP in Idaho. But lately, that hasn't been the case. Back in 2015, there was a caucus created in Congress, the Freedom Caucus, a group of far-right, most conservative lawmakers. And within 2 years, a version of that spawned here in Idaho. Announced in March of 2017, it did kind of stall a bit over the summer, but it rebounded. And now the Freedom Caucus has been able to gain a little bit of traction over the last few years. Today, it lists members, 13 members from both chambers. Then came COVID, and Governor Brad Little, a Republican, started declaring emergencies to keep the coronavirus in check. That didn't sit too well with several members of the Freedom Caucus, and they pushed back on all the suggestions of health protections: masks, social distancing, essential businesses, vaccines, COVID cash, even though many of their members partook of the ARPA pool of funds. These days, the dissension displayed during the pandemic is still pretty prevalent, that is. In fact, it's become more aggressive, and several Republican central committees around the state leaning more right. The separation within Idaho's GOP has been described by those directing it as grassroots. But for those it is directed towards, it's more like scorched earth. The Republican reign in Idaho politics has been the norm for the better part of 3 decades. While they've certainly seen a few passing storms, lately, the overwhelming, organized supermajority has been weathering more of a seismic shift in its solidarity.
Mr. Chairman,
a shift
it is my honor to nominate Dorothy Moon,
which showed itself in the summer of 2022, when there was a call to change the leadership of Idaho's Republican Party.
And Chairman Dorothy Moon.
Former lawmaker, former member of the Freedom Caucus, and failed candidate for Idaho's Secretary of State, Dorothy Moon, behind 434 delegate votes, would take control for 2 years in Twin Falls.
We have to make sure, with the Democrats coming at us in full force, that we have our barriers up, our guns are loaded, and ready to keep this state free.
Then came the election that fall, when redistricting and the redirection of the party would see 40 seats of the Idaho legislature filled by first-time members. New names like Senators Carlson, Herndon, Lenny, Trakel, and Zuderveld, plus Representatives Alfieri, Gallagher, Hawkins, Price, and Wisniewski would all make themselves members of the Freedom Caucus. Those members and the rest of the Republican lawmakers would get another indication it was a new day on their first day of the 2023 legislative session.
In short, I want everyone to know that we will be here for the entire session, offering a helping hand, but also to have a watchful eye on every Republican member.
More on that watchful eye in a moment. But let's jump ahead to June 2023, when, on a remote ranch near Chalice, one of the most out-of-the-way spots in the state, Idaho's GOP held their summer meeting. There, just 216 members of the party would decide the rules, the platform, the future for the rest of the nearly 600,000 registered Republicans. Among several others, that meeting would produce a new party rule first proposed by Brandon Durst a year before. The former analyst for the Idaho Freedom Foundation claims he lost his bid to become the next state superintendent because of too many crossover votes, what he calls not really Republicans going against him. Durst and many of the delegates to the summer meeting believed it should be tougher to register as a Republican, meaning anyone who affiliated with another party and wanted to switch could have to wait more than 2 years to join the GOP and vote in the closed Republican primary.
What we want is we want committed Republicans participating in our process. We're not even going to put a litmus test on ideologically what part of the party they're in.
I was going to say, because it sounds like that's what it is. It sounds like you have to believe this and this only.
Yeah, see, and that's why the rule doesn't speak to where they at. We don't actually say, you know, you have to sign some oath that says, yes, I agree with all these parts of the party platform. We're not having that requirement.
Well, maybe not for voters, but going forward, for those they voted in, there would certainly be an ideological litmus test. A suggestion that would surface when Chairwoman Moon laid out the party's priorities at the beginning of the 2023 legislative session.
Quietly, there are lots of Republicans who talk about how the party's resolutions are just scraps of paper, to be given almost as much credence as you would junk mail. That changes today. As such, I'm going to be holding meetings for concerned citizens and party members to provide a roadmap to ensure the legislature obeys the will of the party. For those who don't, well, hell hath no fury, like the chairwoman scorned.
Several bills that session would manifest that fury. Perhaps none more than the attempt to limit what books would be available in Idaho's public libraries. House Bill 314 would restrict minors' access to certain materials, what proponents referred to as obscene materials. They would primarily point to books with LGBTQ+ themes as examples. The Children's School and Library Protection Act would pass both chambers, but it would not get enough votes in the House to override Governor Brad Little's veto. 14 House Republicans voted against it 3 times. And that would earn them, along with Governor Little, a vote of no confidence during that summer's State Central Committee meeting in Chalice, following another rule put in place that weekend.
Now we have another group that can go back and question whether you made the right decision as a voter, and they can actually pull that person in front of a committee and put them through an inquisition, and if they don't meet whatever standard has been set, then they can no longer run as a Republican in a primary.
This is where the gap in the Idaho GOP begins to widen, with central committees calling lawmakers on the carpet instead of allowing constituents to keep them culpable at the polls. Republicans being reprimanded by their Republican committees instead of by those that elected them. Well, there's much more to this story, a lot more, which is why we had to kind of break it into 2 parts for you. So coming up on the other side of the break, we speak with several lawmakers who have borne the brunt of this eat their own mentality and movement within Idaho's GOP. Spend any amount of time on social media these days, depending on your algorithm, you've likely seen the infighting within Idaho's Republican Party. It's mostly one-sided, of course, with a lot of the word rhino being thrown around by those who call themselves the real Idaho conservatives. This is a breach that has been brewing for years, though. But this past year, it's becoming a lot more glaring and aggressive, with several lifelong Republicans being told they're not Republican enough.
Mr. Chairman,
New leadership.
it is my honor to nominate Dorothy Moon.
New membership in the Freedom Caucus.
I'm like, oh, the far right. I'm like, no, we're the regular right.
A new party platform and new rules have all highlighted the new rift in Idaho's Republican Party.
I mean, you're either all in or you're completely out. There is no opportunity for individual thought.
One such rule, which might remove room for individual thought, passed last summer. Article 20 breaks down party platform enforcement and allows for central committees to censure elected Republicans for not following the party platform closely enough. The Children's School and Library Protection Act would test that rule, an enforcement Representative Julie Yamamoto from Nampa found herself facing last spring after her no votes on House Bill 314.
I think it's designed to intimidate, to cause fear, to...
So did Representative Lori McCann from Lewiston.
I was frustrated and thought this just isn't the way things should be handled.
As well as Representative Mark Sauter from Sandpoint.
But I'm pretty comfortable with the way I voted, and I feel that I voted very conservatively.
All three, including Representatives Matt Bundy and Kenny Roten, would all receive a vote of no confidence or a vote to censure from their local Republican Central Committees. Representative Sauter, he didn't find out until Senator Scott Herndon sent him an email saying he was letting the media know about the vote.
Yeah, that was the notification.
From a fellow legislator
Yes.
in your area said what you're doing is not Republican enough.
No, he just informed me of the action of the Central Committee.
Okay, because he's on it.
Right, he's the chairman.
Representative McCann,
Can you be there? And I was still in session.
she also didn't get a chance to defend herself in Nez Perce County.
And when I received that message, I thought about all of the emails that I had received from constituents and from citizens from across the state of Idaho, and an easy 3-1 no on the library bill.
Yamamoto says her Canyon County vote of no confidence came without anyone from the Central Committee contacting her either. What does this mean, a vote of no confidence?
Well, I know to them it means that they are hoping the central committees will have more decision-making ability over who the candidates are. And what they're really trying to do is that they want to weed out people that they feel like are not as conservative.
If the goal is to narrow the range of what it means to be Republican,
Smaller Republican Party.
former party chair Tom Luna says that approach is going to alienate a lot of conservatives.
If you want to see where a majority of the Republicans are politically, look at our last primary, where Brad Little won overwhelmingly, Scott Bedke won overwhelmingly, Debbie Critchfield won. These aren't the candidates that were supported by the people that are now controlling the party.
Those now in control of the state party seem to be all in on punishing those not following the party platform. A priority fully endorsed by the party chair,
that do not
as she told a
want
Twin Falls radio station
run as
following the last legislative session.
If they're not going to act like Republicans, I guess we're going to have to do some real soul-searching. We need to tighten things up. We need to support true Republicans who follow the platform and honor the Constitution. And that's what the chair of the Twin Falls Party should be looking at.
State Senator Jeff Schroeder
That
said
sentiment was echoed on social media,
but his voting record tells a different story.
by several, quote, real Idaho Republicans.
To support conservative principles,
and when real conservatives come in and try to act conservative and vote Republican and vote in line with our GOP party platform, they have this reaction like, oh, the far right. I'm like, no, we're the regular right.
But the question remains, regardless of where one sits on the spectrum, are legislators elected to represent the people or the platform?
To serve the people and not the party. We did not get elected to serve Dorothy Moon and the officers of the Republican Party. We were elected to represent our constituencies.
McCann also represents Latah County,
Oh gosh, Latah County is a very swing area.
whose politics can best be colored purple.
My area, I've got Moscow, and so I've got some liberal thinkers, and then outside of Moscow, I've got some very conservative thinkers, and so I'm trying to balance that.
However, despite that balancing act, the Latah County Republican Central Committee decided to tip the scales in their favor during an August meeting in Moscow. They censured McCann for 5 of her votes during the session. Is she supposed to represent the party, or is she supposed to represent the people that elected her?
Well, she's a representative of all the people. You know, when we talk about censure, what we're wanting to do is open lines of communication so that as we talk about some of these critical areas that we think are critical, that we think we're being heard.
Okay, but in the end, she was censured because she didn't follow the party platform.
In the end, we don't believe the votes that she made aligned with the elements of the party platform. That is correct.
When you raise your right hand and take your oath, it wasn't to follow the Republican platform. It was to make sure that whatever you did follows the U.S. Constitution and the Idaho Constitution. The platform should give guidance as to what those that are at the meeting believe, but does that really represent all of Idaho?
For a political party that claims nearly 60% of all registered voters in the state, can this push further to the right while name-calling and chastising those who push back? Can they maintain the supermajority, or will the chasm create an unfixable fracture for the future?
So we have two different approaches to unite the Republican Party. One is to grow it, made up of people who agree on 80% of the issues, and the other is to purge anybody that does not agree with you 100%.
Do you feel like there's an attempt at a purge in the party?
I feel like that we are kind of at a crossroads in the party, and that if we do not work together, we're going to lose. I honestly think that if this group would sit down with the rest of us and say, okay, how do we work together? We have not been able to accomplish that because compromise, to many of them, is a bad, dirty word.
We always have to compromise. I don't know about you, I'm an old guy. And I can just tell you, in my life, I've had to compromise a lot. But I think I've accomplished a lot by doing that.
What's going on is bullying, is mean-spirited, and it is not what the people in the state are asking for, and that's what's frustrating.
Some see this approach as a cleansing of the party, while others washing away what it's always stood for, a welcoming port for all shades of conservatives.
I truly believe in liberty. I believe in all of those same things that they say, but I don't go about it in a bullish way, and that is not the Idaho way.
Representative McCann was actually censured by all three of the Republican Central Committees from the counties she represents. Nez Perce, Lewis, and Latah. Latah was the only one to allow her to defend herself and her votes. You may be wondering what penalty of censure or a vote of no confidence might carry. Well, not much, actually. It means they won't have access to a small amount of campaign funding or any endorsements from those Republican Central Committees. Something Representative Sauter said he didn't get anyway. Those reprimands, though, they have not ended. The Post-Register reported 2 weeks ago, all three Republican lawmakers from District 32 have been called to appear to respond to allegations of violating the party platform. That's in eastern Idaho. And it's not just lawmakers who are facing this fracture. There was also the resignation of the entire Ada County Central Committee leadership and a lawsuit brought against the state party by the Bingham County Central Committee. We did reach out to the Idaho GOP chair, Dorothy Moon, several times to ask her about the direction of the party. She didn't respond. We also didn't hear back from or were refused an interview by Nez Perce Central Committee, the new leadership of the Ada County Central Committee, and Senator Brian Lenny. Maybe you're also wondering why you should care about the infighting in the state's majority party. Because the group leading this party right now, and the ones trying to take over the lead-in making the laws, is the same faction that doesn't want to see the health of the mother as a consideration for abortion. In fact, Senator Herndon wants to see rape and incest, that exception, removed from Idaho's abortion ban. Any ally of the LGBTQ+ community, they refer to as a groomer. Check the likes of Senators Tammy Nichols and Brian Lenny. Chairwoman Moon led a quixotic quest against critical race theory in our K-12 schools, even though she couldn't define it nor find any evidence of it. This is the same group leaning into this Christian nationalism as a direction for the state. So if that kind of stuff matters to you, well, then that's why you should care.